Say another word now. And great. Yeah, let's kick off. Welcome everyone who's joined us for our Light Bytes session. This is our fourth Light Bytes session. It's a new initiative that we started at the beginning of the year. The aim is that it'll eventually be every first Friday of the month. This year that's every first, no, that's not right. First Friday of every month is what I wanted to say. First Friday of every month is the goal. This year it's been first Friday of every other month, just while we're sort of getting it going and getting a bit of momentum and things like that. So thank you very much for taking part. The idea is that once a month, it's just a platform where we can all get together, have a chat, talk about a topic, and just sort of socialize and catch up. And see, once things get back to a bit more of a sense of normality, we'll be presenting the sessions at the office in London, so we'll be able to include some fixture demos, new products, all that kind of thing as part of the events as well. But they'll always be streamed, so we can still reach our wider audience. So let me just stop sharing that and change that view. There we go. That's all of us. Good. Welcome everyone. Thank you. This session is called Back to the Drawing Board, and it's really about being a relighter and sort of relighting shows. So just our panel this afternoon. Thank you very much all for joining us. We've got Will Evans, Rory Beaton, Stuart Porter, Kat Shepherd, who's my partner in crime at ETC, and Tom Boucher. So hi everyone, welcome. Thank you for joining us. So I'm just going to sort of kick it off with a sort of question I'll throw out to everyone. How does one go about being a relighter? Is it, do you start as an assistant and become an associate? Is that is it luck of the draw that no one else is available and you happen to be it? What was your sort of route into it? Rory, if you want to start, just because you're first on my screen, not to put any pressure on you, but
yeah, the one about no one else being available is the one. I started off working with Joanna Town and Mark Jonathan as an assistant on production. So the first thing I did after training actually was an assistant job for Joe at Chichester, and it was production in the Minerva there in Thrust. That was then I can't remember if we knew at the time or we didn't know, but we ended up going on a sort of commercial tour after that. I think we didn't know actually. That was the point, and it was I was covering Joe during a diary clash, and then it ended up going out on tour, and that was handy because we'd sort of accidentally put all the legwork in of having someone that knew the show. That was sort of a bit of a coincidence. So yeah, that was sort of my route was the assistant side of it, really.
Cool. Will, how about you?
Yeah, a bit of all of the above, really. I kind of came into it, dare I say, through stage management. When I graduated drama school quite a long time ago now, was it my first job? Pretty much my first job out was LX operator for a children's show at the National. They'd sort of built a temporary theatre in the Olivia foyer, and I got the LX job for it, and then that did a transfer to somewhere which I can't remember now. And it just happened that, I was talking to the production manager and kind of going, I've just graduated from a lighting design course. And the LD, who was James Whiteside, he wasn't available to transfer. So the director and the producer just kind of went, do you want to do it then? And then from that, James threw me an opera the next year, which I relit. And then I kind of worked out, I kind of like this relighting thing. It's a way to earn money and, first year out of drama school. So sort of pestered people, really. There was a company, they're not really around anymore, but Shared Experience for a long time, particularly during the 90s and the early 2000s, were very, very good. What I'd call sort of mid-scale touring company, and I really liked their work, and I pestered their production manager for about a year, I think, kind of going, I really like your work, I really want to work for your company. And finally she went, fine, we need a relighter, can you do that? and I relit all their shows for a period of about 6 or 7 years after that. And then it, as is the way with these things, it sort of snowballs, and the lighting designers offer you up for other jobs and so forth. And here I am about 17 years later.
Cool. Stuart, how about you?
I a completely different route. If I'm honest, I started off obviously as a lighting technician, and then I became a programmer and programmed a vast number of shows. And then I realised that I was the person who was the only person in the room, and the designer was not there, and consequently, I was programming and relighting shows at the same time. And it was kind of a new stance for me. I hadn't kind of even realised I was doing it. And then I started to become an associate programmer, and then actually moved on. I prefer being an associate to a programmer, so I moved on to being a programmer, and doing relights. I'm very happy to relight a show. It's a great way of making a living, and I was very happy doing it all over the place. And it's literally just recreating the light for someone else's show. I've never really put myself up as a designer, and I'm very happy working as the person that people put in, and that's how I became a relighter.
Cool. Tom, how about you?
I started out kind of doing fringe stuff in London as a designer, and then realised it's not going to pay well, and I needed to kind of progress further. And then at the time, I started working with a lighting designer called Mark Doubleday, and then I did a few operas with him, and he offered me kind of a tour to look after his design, and he actually kind of taught me quite a lot. And through that, I've kind of progressed further. So I do mostly relight stuff as well as kind of chief Alexin as well. So there's a lot of kind of touring side of it. But I kind of like, it's kind of, I almost fell out of love a little bit with designing through various reasons, which I won't go into, but it's been nice to just work with other people and see how they work, so that when I do my own design projects, I can then kind of take little snippets of what they do and kind of put it into my work as well.
Cool. I mean, I've always found it as sort of an interesting thing, because there's two sort of scales of show. There's the big sort of A-list tours where it's absolutely carbon copy, and this light goes in that position at this height, is focused there, and it's at 60%, and end of story. And I think that's one set of skills. But then there's the rest of us who work in the trenches, who on those kind of tours where we light something in venue A, and then we get to venue B, and it's a completely new set of equipment, new lighting positions, new everything, and you're actually having to recreate something as opposed to relight something. And I think that for me is a completely different set of skills that's required, because you have to be able to make decisions really quickly on site. So you have to have a bit of a sort of designer's eye to be able to understand also the intention behind the design. So it's not just about recreating that, was there a blue wash and a bit of side light? It was, why was there a blue wash and a bit of side light? What are we trying to say? How else can we convey that message across? So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, if you've got some examples of stuff you've done where there've been, drastic changes, I'd be keen to hear sort of about how you sort of approached that. I mean, some things, designed in the, I think, Rory, you were saying you did something that was designed in the round and then went to post-arch, or the other way around?
Yeah, I did. I did a production of Summer Holiday at Bolton Octagon, very much. That's a whole other thing, and then it moved. That exact production moved to a pros then, and it was very much started off as we want a carbon copy of this show, and then it moved up to Pitlochry in Scotland, and they do 6 shows in their season, in their summer season. They all rep together, so it's a different matinee as an evening, and so you were working with a rep rig. And trying to recreate this thing that you'd originally done in the round, and it was very much that. It was very, what are you trying to achieve? I always say, what's the dream? What's the dream? What are you trying to achieve? Let's achieve it a different way. And it seems to be all my relight stuff seems to have ended up being things like that. Like the first thing I did for Mark Jonathan was take an opera from Opera Hall in Park, which is a tent in London with basically entirely a moving light rig, to a Danish National Opera. I wanted to tour it with virtually no moving lights. And so the whole thing sort of went from all these movers to what 2-color wash would you like? So yes, and I agree. I think you totally get to the point where you're like, what are you trying to achieve? Let's find a way to achieve it. But it's not necessarily going to be exactly that and exactly where you thought it would be.
And in terms of a skill, sorry, Stuart, carry on.
Go ahead, carry on, Roger.
I was going to say, in terms of a skill set that you think people need to be able to relight a show, I mean, I would say it's you arguably need a stronger set of skills, and I'm probably going to offend a whole bunch of people here, which is unlike me, I know. You arguably need a stronger set of skills or a broader range of experience than perhaps the designer who created the work initially, because that's, and I mean no disrespect to the original design, of course, but they've got a one vision, if that's the right expression to use, approach to the show, whereas your person who's out on the road, it's a completely different experience.
Can I talk about a version of a show that you talk about the commercial side and on the floor? Yeah. I think it happens on across the scale wherever you are. And I'm just going to briefly talk about the School of Rock in London, where I flew over to look at the show in New York, which was great. Saw the thing, met the guys. We went through exactly as you've just described. This light goes here, the whole thing, everything was sweet as. Got to the fit up in London and the plans started coming through. It was going into the new London. It was no longer a Pros Art show. It was becoming this wide piece in the new London. And then slowly but gently, there was Revolve introduced that wasn't supposed to be there, wasn't in New York, or the lifts were taken away, or the flying pieces were changed the whole way. And in fact, it became a complete redesign of the show by the set designer. So it was the basis was the same and the color scheme was the same, but the whole set was totally different. And unfortunately, due to the dates changing, Natasha Katz, who lit the show originally, was unavailable for any of the tech period. So we literally sat with the pictures from MLA trying to recreate this show as it looked in New York, but with what was consequently a completely different set. And everything was completely different. Nothing was staged the same. Everything was totally different. So I'm just going to bring that into the scenario that it happens on every scale of show. It's not necessarily down on the grassroots. And I totally agree with you. It's a skill set. I think you have to have a certain aspect of knowing how to light shows to be able to recreate shows. And sometimes it's more difficult to recreate shows because you have to stick to the remit of the designer than it is to be able to create what you would think would be better for this scene. Because always at some point, the designer will come in and look at what you've created, and their name is still on the poster, whether they've done nothing for it or not. And consequently, you will be either working for them again or strolling off down to find another client. So I'm just gonna pop that into the discussion there, just to let you know that it is. I totally agree with what you're saying, but it is every time you relight a show, it's totally different, and that's the roles of assistants and relights are so completely different and unique to every designer you work for.
Will, how about you? I think you've correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you spent quite a bit of time with Rick and Inspector Calls. Is that? And
yes,
I've done several versions now.
It's been around, hasn't it? I'm also very aware that present with us is Michael Fox, who's our programmer on Inspector Calls and my deputy relighter on Inspector Calls. But yeah, I've been associate on that since 2015. I'm associate light designer number 4 on it, and prior to that I've been involved with it since 2009 when I deputised for Ian Saunders, who was my predecessor on it. So yeah, I often joke with Inspector Calls, it's less being a relighter or an associate. It's more being like a custodian of a very valuable historical piece. It's a museum exhibit, and it's it's exactly what everybody has said about, because although it is a #1 show and we do tour everything, it all comes off of two wagons. There is a lot of relighting to do on it, and it's this weird hybrid between, you know, the venues it goes to are all these sort of #1 venues, and we tour everything, so you would think it is put the light in exactly the same place and it'll do exactly the same job, but it really isn't, because Rick's amazing design, and I don't say that out of flattery, it is a beautiful lighting design. And you are looking after it, but because so much of it is side light, anybody who's seen the show will know 80% of the rig, I would say, is side light, and certainly the key light in pretty much every single queue is always from the side. These side light positions move and vary wildly from theatre to theatre. Some places, you know, if we go somewhere like the Lowry in Salford or something, which is a huge, I think 13, 14, maybe even 15 metre wide pros, is a lot further away than when we do a lovely little cute sort of Victorian playhouse somewhere like we did Edinburgh on the last tour, which suddenly your pros is down to sort of 6.5 metres, and it's never a case of put the light on the right place, in the right place, in the right thing, because its relationship to the stage changes every single venue, and we have a heck of a lot of equipment on the pros booms, and that varies massively as well. I mean, in the real world, it probably, in its relationship to the set, only varies maybe by 1, possibly 2 meters. But because you're dealing with angles and a 3D lighting landscape, moving prospects out by a meter because there's a wall there and you have to, suddenly throws off every single focus, and throws off all your key light, and suddenly somebody that was meant to be lurking in the shadows is bright lit, or somebody that's downstage and meant to be the focus of attention suddenly isn't. I always say with Inspector Calls, I sort of take the focus notes almost with a pinch of salt. I'm hoping Rick isn't listening. They're a guideline. It's never this light must hit this section on all my focus notes. It's this light must light this person in this scene doing this at this point. And oh, by the way, try not to hit the psych. Michael's probably laughing now because that's what I always say. Don't hit the psych. Don't hit the psychodrama. And yeah, it's just echoing what everybody else is saying, really. I think from my point of view, certainly with Inspector Calls, having that design eye and going, okay, well, I don't usually use this light in this scene, but what happens if we do put it in at 50%? That solves the problem. And there would be some people would be like, but that light isn't in that queue. And to me, well, that doesn't matter, because it's about preserving the look of that scene and that queue, and using whatever means possible to do that. So yeah,
I think you're right. It's about recreating intent more than it is the actual look itself. I took something to La Scala for Lucy Carter last year, I think it was, a year before, and she had this. It was an amazing set. It came out of Glyndebourne originally. It was awesome set, and there was one thing, was a sort of whole truss of backlight bars that just in one moment needed to sort of blaze down through the set. And, you know, it had been on the plan, it had been on the thing, and it was fine, and hadn't been rigged, and you know, it's a rep rig, obviously, that, you know, turning stuff around. And I was saying, we're not getting these. No, it's coming, it's fine. And sort of on the last time, when are we getting these? Oh no, you must forget about those. I was like, guys. it's like it is the lighting for Act 3. So it was interesting. So you have to go, okay, well, all right. So that that row of pars is now a 5K Fresnel with a Troller. Thank you very much. Cheers for that. So yeah, it is always an interesting thing. But I mean, something like Inspector Corpse, and I see someone popped in a question about Mousetrap, and it's probably the same. Any show that's been long running, particularly for something that's touring with its own equipment, you're going to get to the point where certain equipment's no longer available and stuff becomes obsolete, or you get to the point where you want to upgrade and you want to maybe bring an LED element into it, or whatever it is. How is everyone dealing with those kinds of choices and decisions?
Well, just to jump in again on Inspectacles, I won't turn it into the Inspectacles show, but we had a major point it was 2015 when we were preparing to go into the West End back end of 2016. And again, anybody that ever seen the show, it rains on stage. It looks beautiful. And originally, I'm not sure who built them. Either the National built them or White Light built them. No one really knows, but they were battens about 4 foot high. We had 8 of them, and they had basically aircraft landing lights in. They were, I think, 48-volt aeros. They were about 4 or 5 degree beam angle, and they were beautiful. And they used to slice through the rain, and they'd make the rain sparkle, and it looked great. And by 2015, it was becoming impossible to find the lamps for them because aircraft now have LED landing lights, and nobody in the world made this particular lamp anymore. And we had quite a long process with me and Rick down at White Light in their studio, spraying water around, much to Brian Raven's disgust, I think, and auditioning lots of units. And eventually we went for the GLP X-Bar 20s, which do a very good job of replicating them. But with that, and that's the nice thing, although I joke that you're sort of custodian of a museum piece, it does evolve. And we have now, on the last tour, we've now got 14 Luster Mark IIs on. We changed the lighting of the sky cloth. It used to be 32 1.2K cantatas in 4 different colours that lit it, and we boiled that down to 11. Michael's probably going to correct me in a minute. I think we boiled it down to 11 lusters, which was a huge saving in power, in weight. We lost a whole meat rack. It was great. And now just 2 flight cases come on, and that's LX3. And just before lockdown, we were auditioning some Mac Encores in the Warms to replace the conventional units on LX1. Interestingly, not necessarily for any artistic reason, but actually for practical reason, because venues were increasingly becoming very wary of putting a taller scope anti-raked on our raked stage, because towards a raked stage that has cobbles on it and holes and water. They didn't like that so much.
What could go wrong?
Yeah, well, it was fine. So yeah, literally, actually, it was the week before lockdown in Cardiff. We were auditioning some Mac Encores, and Rick was there to have a look at them. So the show does evolve, and that's what I like about it as being associate on it, is that Rick is incredibly generous with it, and he always goes, "Oh, if you've got an idea, try it, see what happens." And that's what happened with the Psych, and that is what will happen when we get back onto it after all this on LX1 as well. So it's nice to have that input into the progression of the show, that you're not just recreating every time, and that's the way we do it, kind of thing.
How's everyone else finding gear changes and equipment things? Is it impacting you much?
I think it's becoming more, and I think it'll happen more after this period we're about to go into. I think it's to happen more internationally when you go abroad, to when you're reproducing a show in another country that don't have the stock of kit that we have over here, and the number of suppliers is also smaller. So you tend to have to then make adjustments that are probably not your first or second choice, but literally that's what you're going to have to make the choice to go with. And you're going to have to make it work because the producer's got the budget. They tend to have, in a lot of countries, they tend to have a relationship with a particular supplier. You are then left with that scenario of what you have to do. And I think swapping kit is as much the job as relighting. You've got to try and get what you can to go with the thing. And my top tip is don't go with the newest and the latest, because that's going to be really hard to replicate when you go around the world. You might have to stay with something that's all tried and tested. But that's because I'm a little bit older, I would suspect. But yes, I think that changing kit is it positions where it's actually hung, and the kit happens all the time. And I think that is a tricky part of the job is to ascertain what you can do it with. I swapped some battens out on a show recently, and I regretted it. They were terrible. Their bottom curve was just a nightmare, and they flickered randomly around the set. And I got more lighting notes about these blasted battens than anything else. And it's like, for goodness sake, honestly, I ask you the whole of the rest of the show, but you're still looking at the wall, and that's it. But there you go. That's the problems you get when you take kit and you run out of choices. You don't have anywhere else to go. You have to do something, and then you have to make it work, which then relies on your programmer and people to try and come up with clever ways to try and make what is not producing the colors you wanted to do or the curves that you wanted to do to make it work. And that's it's again, teams around you is also a huge part of what we do, what I do anyway.
What you said there, Stuart, about after we come out of this, like it's going to be more of a thing. It's so true. I mean, I've done quite a lot of design work of small touring things like that go to regional things or studios, and of course you go, okay, there is a higher budget and it's for very specific things. Otherwise, you're going to use their in-house conventionals. And of course, you do that thing where you sit and you go through the spec and you go, great, I'll do this. Very precise global cover, and then you get three venues down the line. You go, oh, we're still doing it with sales. That's a no. Let's get rid of that idea. And it's funny how when you end up thinking about, I find a lot of the time if I'm doing a tour and design, I spend a lot of time thinking about the relight and going, well, let's not do that because that's going to be 9 out of 10 times that'd be great, but it's not very fair on that one venue to be like, oh well, it looks good the rest of the time. That's just so not the point, is it? I find that I end up almost compromising before you've even begun, which is quite interesting.
I think it also, just carrying down that same line, it's amazing how if you've worked on shows with smaller rigs, then you have the knowledge of what and how you can produce a show with a smaller rig. And then when you get a larger rig, you just get more luxury and more beauty to make it look better. Whereas if you get your core positions, I don't know, if you get the basis right to how you're going to get everything keylit and everything sorted out first, then everything else is just an expansion to make that better. But I think that's the tricky part of when you get budget cuts and lights you don't know. You really have to seriously consider, obviously with the designer, because it's not your own decision, but the what has to go so you can save what has to stay, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, just to jump in there, I think that's really important as well, is using the basic equipment and knowing and understanding how that equipment works, because it's all been well, you're having these massive budgets and being able to produce whatever the hell you want, but really if you can't, you have to realize there's going to be substitutions, especially in this day and age when the budget's been cut in half or you're having to get rid of this kit, that kit, and it's like having that understanding of generic equipment and knowing how it works and what you can get out of it. I think that's so important, especially when you go venue to venue, especially around the UK. You go from venues that have got such old kit where their front of house rigs all cantatas to then another venue that's 100 miles down the road that's full of lusters. And it's that adapting and changing and figuring out, well, I can do it with a cantata. What can I do with a luster, or how can I use that light to get, to be true to the design? I think that's kind of really, and especially going internationally, when you send off your kit list and they go, well, we're using a local promoter with a local production company, and we go, well, you can't have this, but we can give you this. And then you realise when you get there that they're giving you, for instance, a Sharpie knockoff that's come from China. And I did a show recently where I had a load of Sharpies on the show, and it was like for like with Sharpies, but then the DMX protocol was flipped. So suddenly we're there with the program, we're going, how is this even possible? What is going on? And you realise you're having to rewrite the fixture just because you're dealing with different kit.
And how do you find your relationship with the rest of the creative team plays out? Because obviously they're tricky, possibly treading into a minefield here. But obviously their sort of instinct is, be faithful to the original design, etc., etc. How flexible do you find directors can be into how understanding of directors? Do they treat you as an equal? What's that sort of dynamic? Because I've had both experiences where you've had someone going, crack on, you'll be fine, you know what you're doing, and then you'll get notes as normal. And then there are others, who every time you make a decision or you update a queue, you've got a funny feeling that they're on the phone to someone going, do you know that he's just changed the time of that queue from 3 seconds to 4 seconds? Is that so it's how do you find, and how do you deal with that sort of dynamic? What's your approach?
It's like the whole acknowledgement of how programming is a whole skill on its own, and it's not some little add-on thing. It's like it's an absolute crucial skill set, and it's the same with this skill set. Like I find that I have had experiences previously where you have someone else's show in your hands and you go to do something, and it's exactly like you say, and it's there's like a lack of awareness that you've been chosen because you are trusted to keep this thing safe. You've not just been picked off the street and they've gone, oh well, I hope you know something about lights, And I think it's so funny that, as we said, you have to almost have not more of a skill, but like there is more of a skill in recreating something, and you're there for that reason. I suppose more often than not, I've found that you don't. Or I haven't felt I've had the full trust until it hits the fan, and then suddenly they realise that you absolutely knew what you were doing, and you've always known what you were doing, and that they shouldn't have made those couple of snide remarks that were actually blocking changes and not lighting changes. And you save something, and they suddenly go, "Oh, thanks so much." You're like, "Yeah, thanks, great."
I think you have to prove yourself. It depends on whether you've done the original production with the team or not, and they knew you when you were in the original theatre when you started off. I think you have to build a relationship like you do with any team of creatives. But I'm just going to chip in here just to say that the people I've had the most problems with are not the original creative team. It's normally the person who has taken over as the associate director or the associate choreographer who wants to place their personal mark on a production that, in my opinion, doesn't need to be made, and consequently the lighting doesn't need to be adjusted to it. So obviously it's not my position to stop them from changing the choreography. That's the choreographer's problem, but it is my position to try and stop them from changing the lighting to suit the choreography that they've changed. So and those are the people that I have personally had the hardest time, I think is the best way of describing it, because they're trying to make a mark, and our job is not to a degree, when you're reproducing a show, is not to make a mark, is to make the show work as it has done, because that's what the product is, and that's the way it's going back again.
The word sort of skills has sort of popped up a couple of times, and there is absolutely skill involved here, but there's also a fair amount of preparation and sort of planning that goes a long way, I think, into into realizing anything accurately. What's your sort of take on production documentation? How much do you rely on being given information? How much of your own information do you take and make? What's your sort of process as far as putting that together? I mean, for instance, is a cue list, a lighting plan, and a video enough? Or do you, or then if that's all you are given, do you then sit and break it all down and analyze things and work out focuses? And where does that responsibility lie? How much of that do you think should should come to you, and how much is your responsibility as relighter?
I'm going to kick off with just the first thing that I think is the most important thing that happens when you're reproducing a show as a show file from the console that is of the show that's there. I think if you don't get that show file, then there's so much information in that file that you are causing yourself. You have to start again from scratch. And that is a lot of inputting on every part. So if I would say the most important thing for me, if I'm reproducing a show, would be some form of show file from the show. And that goes back to the days when the company manager used to have the levels written on a piece of paper to put into the desk in the venue, to when they went to relight a show, when relighting wasn't really an art form as it is now. And they used to just literally put the channels at those levels for the show. And I think the show file, there's other things I don't sort out, but I think the show file is probably I don't know whether the other guys agree, but that would be the one thing that would definitely have to have.
Yeah, I personally always make sure I do my own paperwork. I mean, you're absolutely right, Stuart. The show file, I think the show file is up there with the lighting plan as probably the two most vital things you need. Personally, I always do my own focus notes. I have done relights for certain producing houses where the lighting department likes to do their own focus notes, and that's great. And I will take that as well. But I have always done my own. I'm personally, and it is a personal thing, I'm very old school. I do little pictures, sketches for each lamp or each groups of lamp, or sometimes if there's key moments in the show, I will do a little stick figure sketch of where the lights are coming from and which ones they are and where they're used from. I've had a look at things like sort of Light Right and stuff like that, and I must admit I kind of look at it and go, oh, that's far too mechanical. But that's a personal choice. I think photos have a place, and I do photograph some lighting shots, but generally in my experience, unless you're a really good photographer with a very expensive camera, it is really, really difficult to capture the exact focus of one light on a dark stage hitting nothing. Whereas I find drawing a little elevation and a little plan view with the direction of the beam, where the flare is, where the spill is, that will tell you 1,000 times more, be more useful, than a sort of very whited out blob on a photograph. But yeah, so for me, focus notes, plan, show file, and anything else I can get my hands on generally.
Wing and a prayer.
I'm going to totally disagree with you. Well, completely disagree. MLA has saved my life. It's just MLA is probably I'm not promoting a certain piece of software, but MLA has changed the way that we relight shows, or the way I relight shows. And the most fantastic thing about MLA is that someone comes up to you at the production desk and goes, "This does not look anything like the scene that we used to have. It's totally the wrong color. It's bits and pieces," and you can pluck that photograph up of that cue, and even it's done on a cheap iPhone, you can go, "Look, these are the colors. This is where it is. This is what it is," and it cuts a lot of arguments out. And also, you can use it as a reference material in the same way as your sketches. The light, hitting the floor, it doesn't mean a lot, but at least you know where it is supposed to be. So then you can go, right, that now needs to go to that lit or over the other side because that's all changed. But that was what it was doing, and that was its original purpose. So you can keep a bit more track of what's going on, especially when the rigs get to a size of, a large number of moving lights. I think the bigger the scale, and I think and also how much time you get to go in and do your focus notes, and if you get the chance to do it. I'm not saying your method is wrong, Will, in any way, shape, or form, but I'm saying that Light Right and MLA for me are important tools to find out what was going on, especially if they've cut or moved, you can find out what they were originally positioned for. So it's good reference material. I don't think it's a lifesaver, but I think reference-wise, it's phenomenally helpful.
And just for anyone who's not aware, MLA is Moving Light Assistant. If anyone's Googling what MLA is, Moving Light Assistant is the software package. So yeah, that's the MLA that we're talking about. Tom, how much
Yeah,
sort of paperwork and stuff do you sort of get to deal with?
Sorry, say that again, Declan.
What's your sort of paperwork that you would like to, that, well, let's put it this way, what would you like to get, and what do you find you often end up getting?
So I do various shows where I get from back of a fag packet kind of scribbles to kind of MLAs and light writes. I kind of sit in the middle ground where I see the benefit to both. Obviously, if you're either passing a show on to someone else, I understand the benefit of the light write and the MLA, because maybe someone that's not as skilled in the kind of relight sense, they need more of an understanding, or their brain works in that more mechanical, methodical way where you stand on centre line at how many meters or feet or whatever. But I tend to kind of make my own notes. I kind of have, depending on the show, I kind of have my own notebook, and in it I kind of put the light's intention. So I realise what the designer's trying to do, and if, for instance, I'm trying to make changes, I kind of know what the intention of that light is supposed to be. So then I know, well, what it needs to come in at this angle, and that's kind of my thought process, because I can see both ends of it, where you go, it's important to document shows, because I've had it in the past where I've done a show myself and there's not been time to do the documentation, and I've been given it's come back and it's been revived, and you go, what the hell did I do 2-3 years ago? I've not a clue. So even if it's just like pictures on an iPhone, that is some form of documentation is essential, because you don't know what's going to happen throughout, stages when shows go through different lives, and it's about having that documentation ready. And if, for instance, if I can't do the show, it's what am I going to pass on to someone else? Is there enough note-taking or documentation there ready to give to that person that's going to then take over that production?
Mm. While we're at this point, just letting everyone know who's watching the session, if you have any questions for the panel, pop them into the chat window or the Q&A window, and we can address those as well. So feel free to jump on in. There's another great piece of software. I don't know if you guys use it at all, called Stamp. I don't know if you've come across that. But it's basically something that runs. It only runs on Mac, but I think that there's usually at least one Mac floating around a production desk somewhere. And basically, you can work it to the console and use its built-in camera, and you can record the show. And every time you hit go on the Alex desk, it actually puts a little stamp on the timeline, and it labels it, and it does all sorts of clever things, so that it gives you. I find that as a sort of archived copy of a show quite useful. Because sometimes you don't often get the same DSM on tour, or you're not sure where the cues are being called. So to work out timing adjustments and things like that can sometimes be hard. Whereas at least when you've got that, I find it quite useful, because you can go, oh, okay, the cue is generally taken here. So it gives you a sense of sort of something that you're looking for. I don't know if anyone's had any sort of opportunities to play with that at all.
To me, that takes it a stage too far.
Okay,
you take it to the point where you're trying to make it so productive. Having just said my MLA speech, that then takes it to the point where it becomes too precise, and you're going, right, you've just called that cue wrong, and it's like, why is it not working? Why is it not falling? You should, the most important part of everything that we do as far as lighting is concerned is looking visually at the stage and making sure that what we see and what we get is what we want it to be. And I think it's called Stomp, isn't it? That it takes it to the point where we're taking accuracy down to a point where we've never had it before. And before we had moving light assistant, I used to rely on labels on the screen from the programmer and making sure that all those preset focuses said John's back of head or downstage left crosswash or whatever it was. And that was my notes. That's how I used to do it. I used to just do it on the screen and follow those focus notes literally for the moving light wise. That was what it was doing, because I labeled up every preset focus with the information. Again, that was my method of going through.
Well, I think, and I think it's the danger of technology, in that it's keeping people's eyes down as opposed to actually up and looking at the stage. And there is a reliance on technology, particularly, and no offense, again, I'm probably going to upset a whole bunch of people here, but There we go. It seems to be something for the younger generation gets sucked into, is they get sucked into the apps and the technology and all this kind of stuff. And sometimes they forget to actually just look at the stage, just look up and see what's happening. And, 9 times out of 10, you can see if someone's standing in the dark, and whether that light is plotted into that queue or not. If they're in the dark, put it in.
Also, Declan, at some point you're overlooking so many monitors that you can't see the stage anyway, because you've got this. You've almost putting a flood next to you, because you've suddenly got, you have to have a touch screen, your laptop, and your MLA screen, and your thingy screen, and you're just surrounded, and you've got this little pocket in the middle of this technology array to try and see what's going on, and that's the bit that everybody else is going to see. They're not going to see your monitors when you come in to see the show. They're going to look at the stage. It's so important.
I think what we should do on our next iteration of consoles is have a sort of cutout in the middle of the screen area that you can actually look through. So when you're sitting at the console, you can just glance through shape it like that sort of classic movie binocular kind of sort of cutout. So it feels like you got a good view of the stage.
Just on the stamp thing's really interesting, because I think in a world where we're getting less and less time to recreate things, it's really hard, isn't it? There's a really hard balance act between do you document it to that nth degree where basically everybody can look at it in advance and from various departments, when you're reaching the point of queuing, and that when you go in and you've got the in at 7 in the morning and you've got a show at 7 at night, and we'll just call it a preview and it'll be fine. That's really, really helpful at that point. And it's really hard because, it would be lovely to not use it and go, oh, well, I'm adapting it and I'm doing all these skills that we've spoken about. But the bottom line is at 7 o'clock, if it doesn't look right, you're getting hung out to dry for it. So it's hard, isn't it? Because I know what you mean about getting sucked into the technology of it. But then also I think there is a time and place that it's dead useful.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the technology side of things tends to fall into my sort of prep time rather than when I'm actually in the theatre. I try and make sure that once I'm in the theatre that I'm at the point, I'm comfortable enough with the show that I know I can look at the stage. Hopefully I'm not the one who's having to program the show at the same time, but sometimes you are, because that's just the gig and that's how it works. But it for me, the technology side of things is helpful on prep side. Which actually leads me into how often do you find as a relighter you're also a programmer, or do you try and always make sure there's someone to push buttons for you? Where is that sort of division of labour?
I personally, I'm sorry to jump in. There seemed to be a pause, so I thought I'd nick in there. I personally would like a programmer every time, without a question of a doubt. If I can get a programmer, I'd take one without any hesitation. It means that I can look at the stage, I can deal with the meetings, I can talk to people, and something will be progressing on beside me. I've done programming associate work before, and I got called to a meeting at the front of the stalls, and we spoke about what all the changes were going to be, and then they went, well, now let's have a look at it. And I'm going, you've got no hope. I now have to go and put all of that into the console, I'm afraid. So I couldn't leave anybody to finish off or do anything forwards. And that was when I suddenly realized that I needed some assistance to get through what our tight production periods and are getting smaller. You need someone to be tapping that information into the console for you. And I think from a programmer to then become an associate, that's also an interesting conversation to start, because you can't take over what they're doing. You have to have faith in what they're doing, and you can't make them program the show you want, how you used to program it. So that's, but I would always take, if I could, I would always take a programmer. That budget doesn't allow that every time.
Feels expected sometimes, doesn't it, that you rock up to do the relight and they go, oh, the desk's over there. And you're like, great, that's code for I'm doing it, is it? Okay. And it's really hard. I mean, it's like I have a slight issue that I can program, but I'm not a programmer. And I end up spending my time thinking about what button am I pushing? Have I just done it by type? Have I done the right thing? Oh, do I need to look back at what I just did there? Oh, hold on, there's a conversation happening over there. Oh, I can't really go over there because I I really need to do this, but that's a conversation I really should be in. I can't hear that and do this, and it is. But I do think it's just expected, isn't it? And whilst there are lots of people who do it very well, the more that it happens, the more it's expected, isn't it?
Yeah, agreed completely. It's necessary skill, and like you, Rory, I can program. I never call myself a programmer, and it's just a funny little story because I know he's listening. Michael Fox, who's my programmer on Inspector Calls, often jokes that when he comes to do the relights on my weeks off, he spends more time putting the show file back together again, but for that exact reason, because I've been punching buttons, one ear on the associate director saying something to me, eye on the stage, one eye on the monitor, and I've just been recording everything absolute or something without knowing, and then he's had to come in and spend like 3 hours the next week just undoing all the damage I've done. So yeah, without a doubt, I would love a personal programmer every relight. I sort of insist on it if it's more of a remount, if it's something that's sitting for somewhere. We toured Inspector to the States last year, and again it was one of the things I made sure I had a programmer at each venue, because it was like a month sit down in each venue, and it's like, no, I need to give it my full attention. And it sounds bad to say, but when it's weekly touring in the UK, yeah, I do. They haven't got the budget to send in a programmer for 4 hours on a Tuesday morning, so you just got to do it yourself, and then somebody does the damage I've done later.
Or you just keep adding to the damage each week as it sort of as it builds on.
Yeah,
it's one guaranteed way to remember that it's a tracking console is when you're doing your own programming.
Yeah,
and then all of a sudden you go, "Oh, didn't mean that to happen."
Yeah.
Undo.
Show watch though, Declan. That's all I can say. It makes for an interesting show watch.
Yeah, absolutely.
Remember tracking. If you find that little tracking fault during the show, it's always an interesting one to go, oh my God, when is it going to be the next block? Because I really want that to go out now.
I really need that light to go out now.
I say that haven't done any shows that I've done, but I would just like to highlight that occasionally you're praying for a block.
We did a version of Hamlet a few years ago, and I was also doing that. I have to do the programming because there's no one else. So, I had a little sort of fire flicker effect at one point on the flags. There were some pars uplighting the thing. And the effect runs, and the blackout at the end of interval happens, and this effect is still going. And I'm like, I can't believe I've done this. Next thing, crew runs on with fire extinguishers and actually puts out a fire. Turns out the cast had a quick change, took his jacket off and threw it off the stage on top of one of the pars that were uplighting. And of course, this par was just happily cooking away at this piece of costume. And it just happened to actually burst into flame at the moment so.
But that's also the moment you realise how good the effect was. You didn't know the difference.
That's so true. So true.
Put that one on your CV.
They didn't see it that way, though, unfortunately. I was like, a good piece of programming. Yeah. Anyway. So what would you say has been your best and your worst relighting experience as a sort of, without necessarily mentioning shows if you can't for political reasons or anything like that, but yeah, a little anecdote of a best and a worst occurrence.
I can absolutely chip in with my worst.
There we go.
I was, this is probably the worst experience I've ever had, but I was doing a show in India, of all places, and it's the only show that I've ever been in full PPE whilst doing a relight, for fear of something being dropped on your head. They're currently working behind me, so as I'm focusing, they're rigging. It's that really strange situation, but yeah, that is probably the worst situation I've ever been in. Going, oh my God, what is going on here? Can someone please just, and they're angle grinding and bare ending wires into things, and you just go, do you know what? You do what you need to do, and I'll just carry on doing my job and make it look good. Thank you very much.
I mean, I found one of the hardest things to deal with relighting shows, particularly where you've got sort of almost in the morning and open that night or open the next night or something like that, is your schedule obviously squatters down. So everybody tends to be fighting for time. When you created the show initially, you had some time to program and it was maybe a fairly relaxed tech or whatever it was. Now all of a sudden you're trying to relight a show and you've got the sound doing sound checks with, bass drums going thump, 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 thump in the background and all sorts of drilling and noise. And that for me is the hardest part of the process, is just sort of being able to tune that out and kind of sort of get rid of the white noise and be able to focus on things. Because 9 times out of 10, when they're sound checking a number 2 numbers ahead or behind from the number you're actually lighting on stage at the time, which generally doesn't make it any easier.
It's also the whole thing of when you are there specifically to do the relight or to check on it or to do whatever it is. Of course, everybody goes, listen, it's that time, so we're going to go for dinner, but you'll be grand, won't you? You'll be fine. And then you're just left in this room on your own, looking at it going, what were my life choices that got me to this? And that once again, it's me that's left in the dark with, the bass drum thumping away in the corner. And then somebody going, will it be okay if we open the house soon? And you're like, where's this time gone? It's sort of, it's the equivalent of letting sound have the dinner breaks in tech, isn't it? That now becomes your thing. That suddenly they go, you'll be fine just having the dinner break, won't you? And then you can always have a break when the show's on. And you go, no, I've got to watch the show and take notes on it now. Yeah.
I think my worst relight experience was actually an artistic one, when I came across several different skin tones, and we had a set of leads, one male, one female, and they were rotating. So there were 6 sets all told, and the male and the female had one had dark skin, one had lighter skin. It was a whole complete combination of just complete a total mix up. And every time you got it balanced to one set, the next set would come in and someone would be too bright, the next person would be too dim, and it was finding that overall compromise across the set, which is lighting, I suppose, to a degree, but it's really tricky to get that scenario down to balancing of all the different casts and bits and people to make it work. And it wasn't their fault. It was the fact that we just had to balance the lights to a medium that worked for everybody across the board. And and the other time is always when the chippies get late. That's the lighting time that always gets knocked out the window. The carpenters always go, well, we finished. Yeah, literally as the house was about to open. Thanks, chaps.
On that note, do you ever find that you're sitting there when the show's open where you're thinking, I just need to quickly go to the desk and make these changes, like it's got to be done?
And for me, I wouldn't go that close to a show. I'd let it run. Let's go. Let's see what happens.
Start losing fingers, right?
Just let it go. Let's let it go.
Okay, see what happens. As long as no one's going to lose a limb as a result, it's
has to be safe. Obviously, yeah. I wouldn't want to.
Cool. So, for anyone who wants to be a relighter or wants to get into relighting, what do you think is a route into it? Obviously, it's different for everyone, but if you had to give someone some advice aside from run away, what would it be?
For me, I would say tour a show in the UK. If you want to learn how to relight a show on a show, I think Will's in a fairly privileged position to a degree that he's allowed to go. I don't know whether you go every time to the inspector calls, but most shows are now sent out. Even the large musicals are all sent out with just the chief electrician, who is going to be the person who is the relighter. And if you want into relighting as a profession, if you can do it in the UK, then you can probably do it anywhere. As Will's emphasised and everybody else has been saying, that the front of houses and the size of brass and everything is so dramatically different in every venue that if you want to seriously do a relight, get yourself on a tour, because that would be a really, really good way to find out how to sort the problem.
And it seems like you're also saying that to be a relighter, there's a chance that you're also sort of chief electrician. So there's a whole other set of skills that sort of plugs into the back end of that. It's not just you're not just there in a creative capacity. You actually need to understand how the show physically fits together and sort of plugs in and comes together. Yeah,
Definitely.
I think Stuart's bang on. Oh, sorry, go on, Will. Go on.
Yeah, I was just going to echo that. A lot of my early stuff, sort of what I'd call sort of mid-scale touring, I was relighter and Prodi LX, but I also didn't operate the show. I left on the Tuesday, so you had to know how to program it, you had to know how to plug it all up, you had to understand all the touring kit you were touring and have the artistic eye. And for me personally, I love that, because I like the technical side of things as well, but more on the angle of how the technology makes the art. So for me, that's why I loved getting into relighting, particularly at that mid-scale, because I was involved at every level.
I mean, you all obviously do your own sort of design work outside of the sort of relighting stuff. How strange do you find it making that change from doing your own thing to doing somebody else's? I mean, I'll kick it off. When I did the only sort of official time I've ever been a relighter was for Lucy Carter, when I took the show to La Scala, and it was a weird process because we only had, at the time, they didn't know it was going to tour. It was never on anybody's sort of radar. So the only archive of the show was the show file and a really bad sort of handycam archive from the balcony rail 400 meters back, that would sort of pull focus in and out as lights dimmed. So, you were never getting an accurate version of the show. And it was really hard because you're sort of looking at it going, well, I think it was blue. It might not have been. It might have been a lavender, and the camera just didn't deal well with that color. So, we'll chuck something at it and see what sticks. So it was weird. I mean, it was nice that the team, sort of left me alone to a large extent to sort of have a play and sort of shape it. And, the director and the designer, the original director and designer were there, so I could at least have someone turn around going, is this vaguely what it should be? Because, I mean, it feels to me there should be something else, but, is that okay? So it was a weird, it was a slightly weird process. It was good fun because it's always fun to get to someone else's head, I find, and try and unpick, because we all do things slightly differently. So it was fun to see how that approach was. And it was actually, as we started going through it, I could actually sense what I did have that was amazing is I had all Lucy's original rehearsal notes that she took from sitting in rehearsals. And that was actually super helpful because it gave me the insight to her personality and approach to the design, which I thought was really interesting. So it was a case of this moment feels nice and soft and something, and I was like, oh, okay, that's actually useful. So I should probably soften the edge on that horrible streak that's just plowing down the wall there. So it was all that kind of stuff that was really really useful. But how do you sort of find that transition?
There's when you do a carbon copy, like you were saying, and they say, I just want it to be exactly the same everywhere you go, and I think it's really funny because you sort of do all these. I find that I almost end up building a closer relationship with the local crew than if I was there as the designer, because basically one of them pipes up and goes, "Oh, I don't like that," and you go, "Oh, me too, mate. Hate it." It's what you got to do, isn't it? And it's funny how when you're in that position, when you're doing a carbon copy, you don't necessarily have to like it. You just have to do it. It's like the opposite end of going through rehearsal notes and that level of care, isn't it? It's like, no, this is the specificity I'm going for, and it's not necessarily, we're not here to like it, we're here to light it, and that's just how it is. Do you know what I mean?
I want that on a t-shirt.
Thanks very much. I'm copywriting that. Thank you.
Yeah, dude. I mean, to a certain extent, I've never, really sold myself as a programmer, but I've done some programming, of course, and it's for other people. And what I what I find quite nice when I get into the flow is that there's almost no responsibility. You go, great, plot that, and you think, really? Okay, fine. And I guess to the same extent, it does take a little bit of that responsibility away. But also, I think part of us kicks in and goes, if I just move that a little bit and tweak that, it'll just do the thing. And I think it's having that trust with your designer, that knowing that they're okay for you to make those calls, I think is important.
I think that also goes back to how you get started as a relighter. You have to build a relationship with the designer you're taking over from, and they have to have confidence in what you're doing. And that's I think it's as big a problem for designers to find people to relight their shows as it is for us to relight them, because they need to know that you are going to at least keep their headspace on the show rather than taking it over completely or taking over their client, which is also another scenario that has happened in the past with people relighting shows and going forwards. But I'd just like to add to that, going to a designer to a relighter, I've never been a designer really, so it doesn't make any difference to me. I'm very happy to get a plan, the information, and this is what you've got to do, and off you go. Very, very happy with that stage. Just sitting in rehearsals and doing, thanks very much. I'm very happy out of that. It's not a career I've ever pursued, to be honest with you. Which is probably why I took a full-time job in White Light, but that's a separate issue. It's not, designing is not my route, to be honest with you.
I think it depends which direction you come at it from. I've always been a lighting designer who does relights. And as my career has gone on, sort of the design's gone up and the relights have gone down, and Inspector is the only thing I actively relight now. But I'd say, what was, to just extend on your question a little bit, Declan, for me, what was really weird was the first tour I designed where I had a relighter on it. And that for me was really weird, sort of being on the other end of the relationship, because I was constantly second guessing myself. I think somebody brought it up earlier about, if you're a designer and a relighter, I think, Rory, you said, you can approach the design going, oh, I've got to make this easy to tour. And so some things I was doing, I was like, oh, I can't do that because I know that's going to be a right pain in the backside to do on tour. But then I'd second guess my second guessing going, well, no, it looks good. It's my relighter's responsibility to work out how to do it on tour. And then second guess that going, oh, God, am I just being an arsehole now? And that for me was a really strange experience. And me wanting to do the relighter's notes and do it how I do it, and actually having to just take a step back and going, nope, let him do what he needs to do. He knows what he needs to do, and trust, to find myself on the other end of that trust, to go, oh no, well, no, now I need to, many LDs have trusted me with their show, now I need to trust somebody with my show. So that was weird the first time that happened, and me wanting to kind of, any problems, just give me a call. Just give me a call. Just call me every venue, please.
Especially when you're designing a show that's all moving lights or mostly moving lights. I've done stuff for English tour and opera, and they get in the morning and they have a show at night, and then they turn around into the next show, or they move on to the next venue, and it's all moving lights. And there's a great temptation, isn't there, to go, oh, well, we can do this and we can do this and we can do this, and it's going to be wonderful. And then you go, yeah, but hold on, your relighter, who is also the chief, has 2 hours to get all these moving light positions updated, and then do a Q to Q to check it all. And you just sort of go, and it's sort of a conversation, I think, when you're designing, it's a conversation with directors and producers where, their answer to everything is, but it's LED, or, but it's a moving light. And you go, yeah, but it's more time further down the line. Like, either you're going to get a shabby show, over and over because we don't have the time to recreate it, or we scale back a little bit now at the start, and it'll always look like this. I think there is a responsibility to not... I was trying to think of the polite way of saying that, to not be a pain about it when you're designing it, and not go, but I have it, so I love it.
Can I just ask it? Can I just pop a question into the pot, Declan? Sorry but
Go for it.
But I think a part that's sort of unique to both programming and realizing a show is that if you are realizing a show, it's obviously got legs and it's going on. So it'll either be a UK tour or it'll be going somewhere else. And the mindset that you are doing something for someone else to be able to easily recreate without going through the production process. So when they move the show each week or whatever they have to do. And I think that whole thought process is one of the complex parts of realizing shows going forwards, because you have to think about what happens if they get to a venue and they can't rig front of house and they can't do X, Y, and Z. And that's when it becomes a slightly more problematic. And I think that's another whole mindset of you're not just doing the show for yourself. You are consciously at the back of your mind trying to work out how this show can stay as close to what you want the opening night to be relentlessly week on, week out around the country or wherever it's going to next. And I think that's back to the prep stage is a tricky part. And I'm interested to hear what other people do to try, whether everybody thinks in that process or whether you but it's just to try and work out where to go forwards to make it tolerable.
I mean, I think, I know you absolutely raise a valid point. I think, and we could discuss this, but I would say that being a relighter is arguably a more difficult job than perhaps being the original light designer, because you have so much more that you have to think about. And my experience with some management and some producers is that is not the understanding of that role. And that I find quite problematic as well, because you never know. Do you know what I mean? How they don't sort of understand the importance of that person and why they should employ someone who has X amount of experience and therefore costs Y amount per week, as opposed to, well, my cousin, when they finish the bar at interval, they can just come and do that, right? And it is interesting. It's a hugely different skill set, and I actually think you have to be hugely multi-talented and to be able to sort of take that on as a role. And in all of that, I've forgotten what your original question was, Stuart.
No, we were just talking about prep and thinking in the logic that someone else is going to take over what you're about to do. How you can create that so that it can be done without any confusion. Because what you don't want to leave is a list of information that's not going to be, if especially on a weekly tour, especially in the UK, you have to make it work so that they can do it as easily as possible, so that it'll go around. And there's, in fact, the UK, I think, is really unique in its diversity of venues, because they really are so hugely different every time you go each week. And that you have to think, when the director's asking for 64 specials on the cast members, wherever it goes around the country, is that sustainable as you go around the country? Because you will go and see it a couple of weeks later and no one's in any of the specials, because A, the cast haven't gone to the spots where they're supposed to be going, and B, the rig's nowhere near where it's supposed to be. And even overhead, if you move it a foot or a couple of foot either way up and down the stage, which happens due to rigging of beams and bars, all those specials are completely out. And that is an unrealistic recreate on a weekly tour. But it's a tough one to discuss with the creative team at that moment. You can't produce what they're imagining accurately week in, week out, because they are only seeing it in the venue where it's going. And then you get the note 3 weeks down the line of, I went to see the show and all these specials are out, and you go, well, that's the problem. And there's no time to fix it. That's the other scenario.
The interesting positive spin on that exact thing is, earlier you said, I think, if I was to offer advice, it'd be join a tour. It's so true, because there's only so many venues, isn't there? And we all have those conversations where you go, oh, we're going to Bristol next week, or I'm doing a show in Bristol or whatever, and someone goes, oh, now, is that not the one? There's a bar in the upper that no one's allowed to focus apart from the in-house because it's called like the Bar of Death, and it's like there's all these things that by joining a tour you sort of do just learn all these venues, don't you? They are widely different, as you say, but you do slowly start to go, oh, I'm going to Malvern next week with this a size to it. Someone goes, "Oh, yeah, okay, I know where you're at now." Got you.
Cool. So I think that's kind of sort of brings us. Oh, we've just had Michael Scott. So I've had a painful. I was reading the question as it is here. I had a painful show as a production electrician recreating a show in London that had been on a tour overseas. LD arrived with his original book, whereas director and stage manager were using their tour book. Couldn't have been more different. It was a very hard tech. Yeah. I feel your pain, Scotty. I don't know what to say. But yeah, that does, yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, that's the other thing, really, isn't it? Is shows do change on the road, and they do morph, and they do get updated. And I suppose it's keeping everyone up to date on that as well, which is, you know, again, another part of the job. So you're not only are you forward thinking, but you're also, you know, sort of backwards updating as well at the same time to sort of to make sure that everything's current. We touched on at the top of the session. We said, I asked Rory if I could talk about the ALD thing that I wasn't sure that we could mention. Turns out we can mention the ALD thing that we're not allowed to mention, and that's basically talking about. Couldn't be more cryptic. Speaking of relighters and things like that, the ALD runs a scheme called the Lumiere scheme, and it's been going for a couple of years now. And basically the ALD, through various funding partners, is able to support a young lighting designer, emerging lighting designer coming up into the industry, and they're able to pay them a stipend and place them with various designers and in theatres where they can sort of gain some of the experience that we're talking about. And obviously with the current situation, that hasn't been possible. So what they've done is they've opened it out, and they've offered everybody a micro bursary, and it was originally going to be 20 Lumieres paired with 20 mentor designers, and there was I think there's 12 weeks, Rory, correct if I'm wrong, sets of weekly catch-ups and meetings and sort of mentoring sessions with young people. And turns out we've actually managed to get the number up to 38 Lumieres this year, which I think is an amazing thing. So there are 38 new relighters going to be looking for work soon. when we get to the point where we get back to things. So I just want to let everyone know that was happening. I think it's a really, really fantastic thing. Rory, I don't know if you got a bit more information about that you want to share, or if I've just completely butchered it and taken the wind out your sails.
No, that was bang on. Yeah, I mean, basically, it was meant to be 20 lighting designers with 20 applicants, and through kindness of those lighting designers, a lot of them have waived their bursary that they were offered, and that's what's allowed a huge increase of people, because that bursary can now go to the applicant. And on top of that, there were sort of another 22 people on top of I honestly can't remember the number. I think it's between 33 and 38. And there's another 22 people who were equally as deserving, but unfortunately weren't able to pair with everyone. And it's Catherine Williams and Charlotte Burton do that pairing. And they approached me and said, look, there's 22 people that were equally deserving, and we're now running a thing called Team of the Year. So those people are going to work together in a group to go through all the same email topics over the 10 weeks, and are going to have access to lots of talks and discussions and interviews with all the designers that are mentors that unfortunately we weren't able to pair them with, but hopefully by doing this they still get to hear a wide range of everyone's experiences and how they got into it and their process and how they work. So yes. Yeah,
really, really, really exciting venture. I'm looking forward to seeing how that all plays out. So that sort of brings us, I think, quite nicely to the end of our Light Bytes section. So thank you very much to everyone for attending, and for you guys for being on the panel. I appreciate your time. Really good to have you here. Good to have a chat. So thank you very much for joining us. And our next Light Bytes session is on the 6th of November. So we won't be one in October. We're doing first Friday of every other month at the moment. So 6th of November is our next Light Bytes session. Topic TBC. We've got something brewing in the background, so hopefully we'll be able to announce that soon. But yeah, so please feel free to join us, spread the word. We have recorded the session. The recordings go up onto the ETC website or the YouTube channel. You can find them there for anybody who wasn't able to attend and wants to listen back to this, although I suppose telling you all that is a bit like saying to anybody, if you can't hear this announcement, please let me know. But there we go. So if you do come across anyone who says, shucks, I really would have loved to be there, let them know that the session will be posted up to the YouTube channel in a couple of days' time. But thank you very much. I don't know if there's any passing thoughts anybody wants to share before we close out. But certainly from our side, thank you very much for your time. And hopefully we'll see you in a theatre bar again soon.
Now there's wishful thinking, eh?
Fingers crossed.
Well, no, thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Cool.
Have a good weekend.
Brilliant. Yeah, you too. Take it easy.
Weekend, eh?
Cheers.